In Marlborough, the discipline of black troops became a major concern to the segregated US military when a horrific attack took place on September 28, 1943, just outside the town. George Browning was walking home from the cinema with a local girl.
When we came out of pictures, bearing in mind this was wartime, it was completely blacked out, pitch black. All you had was torches, hand torches. We made our way up the hill towards the hospital. And just before we went round the bend of the road, I heard this bang, bang and a screech. And I said to the young lady with me that it sounds as though the Americans are in the forest shooting the deer. As we got round the bend in the road, the torch lit up the kitchen maid laying face down in the road.
To his horror, the victim was a girl who worked alongside him in the hospital.
The blood was still running down the road, and it was hissing, as it does, you know, if somebody bleeds profusely like that. I've seen it in the army. It sort of hisses. I didn't move her, so I don't know exactly where the bullets went in or anything. I mean, I just felt the pulse to see if she was alive or dead.
And what did the pulse tell you?
Dead.
George Browning ran to the hospital to sound the alarm. Local GP, Dr. Morris, was on call that night and rushed to the scene of the crime.
I was shocked because I knew the girl, and she was just one of the hospital staff I saw every day. And it was a terrible shock to see her lying there with bullets in her back. In those days, once the blackout fell, there was virtually no traffic, and she wasn't moved for a long time because the police were insistent that they must leave the body untouched until photographers had come from Devizes to take pictures.
But the dead kitchen maid was not the only victim. She had been out with a friend who was still missing. Locals searched in vain. Then, just after midnight, the friend staggered out of the forest.
She arrived at the hospital in a state of extreme distress and explained what had happened and where it had happened. I just do remember that she was in a real state of distress.
Did you conduct any kind of medical examination?
Yeah, I examined her to establish the fact that she had been raped, which I was able to do.
The girl told the police the rape and the murder had been committed by a black GI.
This is the area where the incident occurred. Well, he was obviously in the edge of the forest here where all these trees are, and it was thick like that. And we think afterwards that the reason he shot her was because of the size of her and the fact she was struggling. He couldn't have never have got her into that forest, two of them at the same time.
But on the night in question, as the rapist pulled his victim through the barbed wire at the roadside, he had left a vital clue: a US Army forage cap. The nearest black unit was stationed here, half a mile away. The 248th Quartermaster Battalion at Iron Gates Camp in Savernake Forest. A bed check was made just after the crime took place. One man was absent. Private Lee Davis. His bed was unmade. On his return, he was arrested. It looked like an open and shut case.
Well, the circumstantial evidence looked very good because Davis wasn't in his bunk when he was supposed to be there, and later when they did find him, he was wearing blood-stained shorts, and some of his clothes were missing at the time, and there was no other obvious explanation for why he had blood-stained shorts on and with seminal fluids on them, and he was supposed to be in his bed.
A blood-stained coat and a pair of trousers, which appeared to be his, were also found near his barracks. When interrogated, Davis confessed,
"I wasn't in my right mind then. and it was an accident, because I thought I had the gun in the air. All I ask is, will you spare my life? I am sorry I did what I did, but I know it won't bring back the girl's life, and I am sorry. I want all the Christians to pray for me.
The Lee Davis case involved exactly what the American forces were concerned about, that is, a black soldier raping a white woman. It was the kind of case that produced a lot of concern about what the Army would do and could do and should do. It was the first rape case which went to trial involving a murder. The U.S. Army was under considerable pressure for public relations reasons as well as for disciplinary reasons to act quickly, to make a decision, and to punish the soldier.
Davis had virtually no time to prepare his defense. Just 7 days after the crime was committed, he was brought to trial at Tottenham House in Savernake Forest. Dr. Morris and George Browning took the stand for the prosecution.
What I do remember about the courtroom was when they finally brought this accused chap in. He was between four enormous great MPs, their white helmets and white belts, mangled hands and feet like the Americans do. And he was like Joe Louis, the boxer. He was big, 21, about 6'6", and muscular. And they brought him down the aisle, and the MP was brushing against me, so the actual accused chap wasn't that far from me. And that really, really frightened me at that stage, you know. I mean, knowing that he was mangled and that, but to see that and to think that he was the one that was being accused of doing it really set the hair on the back of my neck.
But as the court-martial opened, doubts immediately emerged about the foundations of the prosecution's case. Lee Davis retracted his confession, saying he had been tricked into writing it. Then his unit supply sergeant testified that the trousers presented as evidence in court were not the ones he had issued to Private Davis.
When Davis attempted to try on the trousers in court, they were too small. They didn't fit. They were the wrong trousers for Davis. This was not at all inconsistent with other parts of the case. The case involved a lot of circumstantial evidence. It involved a hat, it involved a coat, it involved trousers, but this was all circumstantial evidence. There was not one piece of forensic evidence that connected Davis to the case, including the rifle that was used to kill the companion of the woman he was accused of raping. There was no forensic evidence at all.
More worrying still, in spite of being examined by Dr. Morris and a colleague as to her fitness to testify, the surviving witness was not asked to give evidence identifying the perpetrator, either outside or inside the courtroom.
But there was no question anyway that she was mentally fit enough.
Well, there obviously had been a question, or you wouldn't have asked us to go and examine her, but no, I think everyone was quite satisfied that she was perfectly fit to go.
No record exists in the case file explaining why she was not asked to give identification evidence.
Was he dealt with fairly? There's not a witness who's involved in the crime, including the victim, that says, he's the one. No one comes forward and really hammers him at all. You also get the impression from reading the case it's kind of edgy and it's kind of not tight. The prosecution can't come up with witnesses that really hammer him on anything, and the sergeant who gave him his clothes says these aren't the right clothes, and they don't fit.
It seemed to me that it was all sort of push, push, push to get it done and dusted. And as far as I'm aware, I don't know if there is anything in detail, never heard of an appeal or anything. I think he was found guilty, taken down there, and that was it. Bang. Next thing we heard, he'd been hung.
Despite inconsistencies in the evidence, the court-martial found Private Lee Davis guilty of both murdering one woman and raping another. He was hanged at Shepton Mallet on the 14th of December, 1943.
Somewhere
Most British people regarded the manner and bearing of black GIs as a welcome relief from 5 dreary years of war. But the American military authorities were becoming increasingly concerned. On March the 5th, 1944, in a small village near Cheltenham called Bishop's Cleeve, a 16-year-old local girl was walking home with her white American boyfriend, Private Edward J. Heffernan.
The circumstances are that it's nighttime. The female is a teenager with an American soldier, and they are put upon by 2 soldiers, 2 black American soldiers.
The girl's story was that they were walking back from the pub when they were assaulted.
Hey, soldier, come here!
Her boyfriend got away, and whilst he ran to get help, the 2 soldiers carried her over a gate and onto the banks of a nearby brook. She claimed they then took it in turns to rape her. Investigations continued throughout the night, and boot prints were found at the scene of the crime. The following day, there was a boot inspection at the local American camp. After Reveille, 2 men were arrested. They were Private Elijah Brinson and Private Willie Smith.
There was very little evidence tying them to the case. In fact, there was just a footprint or 2 in the soil that was interpreted as being the same footprint that their boots would make.
There were major holes in the prosecution's case. Descriptions of the 2 GIs were contradictory. According to the girl, they were big-built fellows, but her boyfriend claimed they were of slender build. There was, however, an even greater problem with the girl's story.
There was no evidence from the medical personnel that she had been raped. And that's one of the interesting parts of this case. You have the boyfriend and the girl giving contradictory stories, and there's no physical evidence that a rape occurred.
Nevertheless, both men were charged with forcibly and feloniously against her will having carnal knowledge of the girl, and went on trial for their lives on April 29th, 1944. Once again, there was no identification evidence.
In the Brinson and Smith case, the victim and her companion did not identify the accused. They were not identified in court. They were not identified prior to court.
Brinson and Smith were found guilty and dispatched to Shepton Mallet Prison to await execution. Milton Aspel was a dentist with the medical section of the military police battalion at Shepton Mallet. He saw condemned prisoners before they met their fate.
They had to be certified by a written report by the physician who did the examining, and he had to be in excellent health too, by the way. If he were sick in any way, it was postponed. But all the prisoners that we saw, they were in good health, all of them.
I can tell the world about this. I can tell the nations are blessed. Tell them what Jesus.
Some of them sang spirituals. Some of them moaned incoherently. In fact, some asked for the chaplain. And in fact, one of the questions before they were actually hung, the chaplain said, "Is there anything you wanted to say to me?" And the commanding officer said the same thing. And 9 times out of 10, they had nothing to say.
Even though rape was not punishable by death under English law, the British government aided the Americans in their work by lending them the prison service hangmen, Albert Pierpoint and his uncle Thomas.
The reason that we used Pierpont as the executioner is we didn't have anyone in the U.S. Army who had any experience in doing any hanging. And we later developed a couple of people who did some executions, some not as efficient as Thomas and Albert Pierpont, but they were official executioners, and they were ready to be hired and could be hired for a modest fee to carry out this duty. It made it very convenient.
So Austin was really just like a stranger that came in and had a job to do, like you hire an electrician or a carpenter for the first time. He did his job, and we respected him for it. He knew why he was there, and that was him, and he left.
About this, I can tell the nations are blessed.
In Combe Down, near Bath, just 20 miles from where the executions were taking place, another rape was reported on the 5th of May, 1944. But this case made waves that reached all the way up to the Supreme Allied Commander, Dwight Eisenhower.
A married woman with 2 children said that late at night, a soldier had tapped on her window or door and said, "I need some directions to get back to some area." And she came out of her house. She had a coat on. She said she would walk with the soldier some way down the road to point him in the right direction. That's what she said. And she said that after they were out of the distance of the house and down the road a bit, that he then forcibly attacked her, threatening her with a knife if she did not comply and have sexual intercourse with him.
When her husband found her walking home, she broke down and said she had been raped. He took her to the local ambulance station where she reported the rape. The police were called, and on the way back she pointed out a black GI. He was Private Leroy Henry. When he was arrested and confessed, the case made the local paper, but the villagers were skeptical.
I was a milkman, and I used to deliver milk to the woman's house, so I knew exactly where she lived. And I also knew that her husband was a lorry driver, and he used to work away quite a bit, especially weekends. So I knew a bit about her. Well, she was a regular in the pub, and that's where she met Leroy, in the Cross Keys. They'd been out together a few times, so it wasn't the fact that it was an isolated case of picking on an innocent woman, because I say she was well known in the village. She'd been out with Leroy a few times, so.
Well, the reaction was that this wasn't on, really. This certain person, it was common knowledge, was letting her favours go out, some say for money, and this particular night the price went up, and this chap wouldn't agree to pay it, and she cried rape.
On the 25th of May 1944, Private Leroy Henry was brought before a general court-martial, held here at Nook Camp, Wiltshire. Like many other black defendants, he retracted his statement, saying it was fabricated. He maintained that he knew the woman and that they had had consensual sex.
We then came to a vacant field, and I helped her over the fence. She did not resist in any manner, and then with her right hand, she pulled the left leg of her bloomers to the side, and I put my outfit in her.
His version of the case is that the woman was very familiar with him. She had met him on 2 or 3 previous occasions. She had responded to his question in the street one day if he could, she could find him or direct him to find a good time girl. And he testified, she says, "You don't need to look any farther." And subsequently, they had intercourse on 2 or 3 occasions. He testified also that it was well known that she did this with American soldiers. And it's curious that the defense does not bring forth anyone who can testify to the fact that she is known locally as a loose woman. Or in terms of one person who said she was a bicycle. Everyone got a turn.
Once again, the trial was brief, just one day, and once again a black man was sentenced to death for rape. The village was outraged by the verdict. It was May 1944, and the whole country was preparing for D-Day. But the locals of Coombe Down were more concerned by the fate of Leroy Henry.
Well, the fear was that there was an injustice being done, and it shouldn't be. So I don't know who started getting up the petition, but it certainly gained in momentum, you know, because it went right down in the city of Bath.
At a paper shop in Coombe Down, a petition was started to plead for Leroy Henry's life. It was Pat Spavin's father's idea, and she signed and helped organise it.
Nobody had to be asked to sign. They all signed. They came into the shop. Where do I sign? Or if you asked anyone, they never said no. Because locally, it was known that the man was innocent. And it was a terrible miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, it didn't take me long to sign it at all.
Why did you sign it?
Well, because I thought there was, well, there was no, as far as I was concerned, there was no justice. The man was not guilty. It's pretty plain for anybody who knew the woman concerned and the circumstances that he just wasn't guilty.
Attached to the petition were also letters, written by local people.
My neighbours and I have had no peace since we first read of this case.
Coloured
And I
soldier,
beg of you,
the sentence is unduly harsh and worthy of Nazi
I
barbarism.
beseech you to spare the Negro's life. The woman is a well-known bad lot. She ought to be charged with perjury and flogged. Surely his life is of far more value than even her word or her...
The petition itself was finished on the 8th of June 1944. It contained 33,132 signatures from people around Bath, and a covering letter from one of them.
We pray that this appeal will be successful. God bless you in your great task, and I hope that you can give a few moments for this.
It was sent to the Supreme Allied Commander, Dwight Eisenhower, on the 8th of June. His mind was somewhat preoccupied with other matters. D-Day. 2 days earlier, Allied armies had invaded France. Eisenhower's reaction shows how seriously he took what was developing into a public relations disaster for the US military. He responded to the petition with 6 simple words. The findings and sentence are disapproved.
Very surprising that, you know, a petition like that could sway the Supreme Commander of Allied forces. But it did. So the power of the pen can be mighty.
Leroy Henry returned to his unit, his life saved by 33,000 white people he had never met. When the war ended, he returned to a United States that was as segregated as the one he had left. But the experience of living in a non-segregated society had changed many black GIs forever. On their return home, both Clarence Bolton and Paul Parks joined the civil rights movement.
But that's the kind of world we came back to with, and with me, as I said, with the determination that I was going to do all I could to end the spiritual segregation in my own country. And it was England that taught me that, gave me the inspiration to do it.
Once you've been exposed to a new level of life, you ain't going back. And if you feel under the Constitution that you're entitled to this, then you're ready to stand up.
In 1948, the US Army became the first American institution to desegregate. We approached the current Judge Advocate General concerning the convictions of the 5 men who were hanged and whose cases were investigated in this program. When asked whether these convictions were safe, the US Army replied he would not comment on them.
find out more about the different experiences of black American and Commonwealth soldiers in World War II, go to channel4.com/origination.